think it's working. Supposedly it's not working on LinkedIn because they don't do 60 FPS. But if I stop the stream, YouTube is not going to work, I don't think. So I don't think YouTube's going to let me pop in and out of a stream. So maybe LinkedIn's just not going to work this time, and we'll try to get that working another time. Alright, audio looks like it's working good, on YouTube at least. Bit rate's good. Try to bring up chat. Stats. No chat. Okay. There's a benefit of Restream Studio. You get to see your chat. Alright, well, suppose I can have the Twitch streaming on my phone. Cool. So I can see the chat for Twitch and for YouTube, sorry, Twitter, and I don't think LinkedIn's working, so there we go. Maybe next time we'll just do the Restream Studio. Stick with that. I was hoping to try to avoid the little Restream logo with OBS, but whatever. All right. Gonna quick pull up the that's not right. No. Outline, there we go. Nice. Switch screens. Hey, there we go. Cool. Zoom in quite a bit. And let's get to work. Part 3. Alright, so last time we covered, so I guess to just go over real quick again, these different sections are giving a percentage of the number of questions that are going to cover those topics. So 10 to 15% is going to be on core solutions and management tools. So we talked about this section, these management tools here, and we went into general security and network security features, got through that. And we ended with this chunk here, as well as this chunk to the last 2 sections. So, describe identity, governance, privacy, and compliance features. And I guess just to give everyone a heads up, yeah, I don't know these very well. I'm going to be probably doing a lot of research. So, you know, if you want to stay and watch, feel free. It's not going to be the highest quality content here, but I'm studying for Azure Fundamentals, and I figured I might as well stream it at the same time. So, just take a little drink here of my protein shake. All right. Describe identity, governance, privacy, and compliance. Describe core Azure identity services. Let's see here. Explain the difference between authentication and authorization. So authenticating would be, think about it like kind of giving someone, like giving the police your driver's license if they pull you over. Like they're trying to figure out who are you. And so, and you know, there's both kind of going on there, but first they're trying to figure out who are you, and that's just the authenticating of, hey, I'm Jesse Daher-Canal, and kind of proof of that. Whereas authorization is kind of the different roles that you have, like should you be able to do this? So maybe they would, yeah, part of a driver's license is like saying like, yes, I can drive a car. So it is also authorization. But then like maybe you're driving a semi, and so then there's different parts on there that say like, yeah, I can drive a car, but I can also drive a semi. So, you know, that can be part of, or that's what authorization is. Define Azure Active Directory, also known as Azure AD, basically kind of mimicking Active Directory that's on premise, but in Azure, basically like a store for your different users, and the credentials that they have, the roles, the groups that they're a part of, all of that type of stuff. And then that integrates with a lot of the other Azure services, so that you can kind of have like a seamless, like single sign-on integration throughout, where they just kind of authenticate, and then everything then says, okay, we know who this guy is, or gal, and then kind of looking at the authorization of, do they have access to these different services. Describe the functionality and usage of Azure Active Directory. So I kind of just did that there. You can use Azure AD on premise. Really kind of, I think it comes down to cost, but I think a lot of people do have Azure AD set up. It's whether you then add on top of that like Office 365 and some of those other extra licenses that you can get. I think Azure AD in and of itself isn't necessarily that expensive. Describe the functionality and usage of conditional access multi-factor authentication, aka MFA, single sign-on, SSO. So conditional access, it's capitalized here, so it sounds like it's a particular thing. You know, I would just say off the top of my head that like conditional access is like, there's only certain things that you're able to use, certain services. Just kind of gets into authorization. I'm just gonna move my head over here so it's blocking the screen a little bit less for you guys. So yeah, and I guess you can deny access to things. Definitely, like if someone leaves the company or whatever, they have different roles that they change into, you can add, or so we'll have to see if that's kind of what they mean there. Multi-factor authentication, a lot of people should be familiar with this now, where you have to authenticate in multiple ways. So that can be using your phone. It can also be providing some sort of biometric through the your laptop. There's fingerprint sensors. There's the camera to do face recognition. Um, keys that you can have, like USB keys, um, and the phone can kind of do some of those things as well. And there's the Microsoft Authenticator App. So that's kind of where that comes in. Single sign-on is just this thing that Microsoft has and a lot of other companies have, where once you authenticate, it kind of carries that token with you, and each of the Microsoft services that you're using, it's using that token. So you don't have to keep signing on to every single Microsoft service that you're using, and you can integrate that in with your custom apps as well. So you're not, you don't have to sign in multiple times, obviously. So let's Google conditional access here and see if it's kind of like a specific thing. Here we go. Conditional access in Azure Active Directory. Modern security perimeter now extends beyond organizations' network to include user and device identity. Organizations can use identity-driven signals as part of their access. I don't know what that means. Conditional access brings signals together with division to enforce organization policies. Azure AD conditional access is at the heart of the new identity-driven control plane. I don't know what that means. Conditional access policies at their simplest are if-then statements. If a user wants access to a resource, they must complete an action. Payroll manager wants to access the payroll application is required to do multi-factor authentication to access it. Administrators are faced with different goals. Always be productive. Protect the organization's assets. Yeah, right. So this is a big thing that came up, definitely during the pandemic, is like, hey, if people have to work from home, that is a thing that we have to enable now. There's no choice there anymore. And so they have to be productive wherever and whenever, for the most part. But you can't just open up all the doors and everything and just say, yeah, you can just access from whatever, using whatever. You've got to limit that somehow. So you've got to protect organizations' assets. So MFA is a big tool for that, helping with that. Use conditional access policies to apply the right access controls when needed to keep your organization secure. Nice real time. Verify every access attempt. Okay. So, and I think this gets into some of the zero trust type stuff. So, you're always checking. You need to have some sort of token though, because we do want single sign-on. You don't want to make people sign in for every single app, but maybe every single time, kind of every session, then you ask for credentials. So it sounds like conditional access is kind of this system that's figuring out, hey, when do I ask, when do I not, what am I requiring? Depends on, certain services maybe are kind of higher risk, and so, or maybe somehow more important to the company. So then you'd want to require MFA, whereas otherwise you wouldn't necessarily need it. And so you can kind of configure some of that. And I've never set up any of the Azure AD stuff. I'm a developer who I come into companies and just help them maintain the code that they've got and kind of come up with new code. But I'm not helping them set up like an environment. So a lot of the Azure stuff is kind of already set up. Definitely when it comes to security and all that, that's already set up. So I've never had to do anything with that. Use it. Monitor and control real time. Okay. So, yeah, it's a little confusing. It seems like conditional access is an idea, not a service. So it's kind of, how do you set up Azure AD and Microsoft Defender for Cloud and some of these things together? So I think we've got a decent idea what that is. Describe Azure Governance features. So functionality and usage of role-based access control. I know that you can control who can, we're talking about Azure governance, we're talking about like who can, set up new resources, who can change resources, who can view resource information. There's a lot of different things that can be done with Azure resources. And did we already talk about, yeah, we talked about like kind of subscriptions, management groups, some of that type of stuff. So let's Google this and just try to really make sure we're doing that. Base access control. And let's click on Azure. Helps you manage who has access to Azure resources, what areas they have access to. They're built on Azure Resource Manager, aka ARM. Provides fine-grained access management of Azure resources. Allow one user to manage virtual machines and subscription, another user to manage virtual networks. Okay, so you can get real fine-grained with their access. Allow a DBA group to manage SQL database and a subscription. So it seems like mostly within a subscription you would use this. Allow a user to manage all resources in a resource group. Okay. So on application access all resources in a resource group. So it sounds like it can kind of exist at different levels. You can give different access at different levels. Security principal is an object that represents user groups, service principal, or managed identity. Service principal, I think, is kind of like a sense, like it's like this entity for a given Azure resource. Managed identity, I think, is similar, but kind of with more fine-grained control. I don't know. If we dive into that, we might have to, we might have to research that more. Requesting access to Azure resources, you can assign a role to any of these security principles. Okay. Role definition, collection of permissions. Just call the role. Role definition lists the actions that can be performed, such as read, write, and delete. Contributor actions. Okay, so allow all actions, but not delete, not write. Can't elevate access. Signable scopes. Okay. Those can be high level, like owner, or specific, like virtual machine reader. Which includes several built-in roles that you can use. Okay. Virtual machine contributor. Role allows a user to create and manage virtual machines. You can create your own. Makes sense. Make sure there's data actions that enable you to grant access to data within the object. If a user has read data access to a storage account, then they can read the blobs or messages within that storage account. Scope. So the resource that access applies to and using a role. You can further limit the actions allowed by defining a scope. If you want to make someone a website contributor, but only for one resource group, specify a scope at 4 levels. Okay, this is kind of what I was talking about. This is different levels. So top levels, that management group, then you go down to subscription, then resource group, or a resource. So resource group can have multiple resources. Subscription can have multiple resource groups. Management group can have multiple subscriptions. Role assignments. Attaching a role definition to a user group so responsible to manage identity. Makes sense. I think that's pretty good. Pretty good idea. Describe the functionality usage of resource locks. We assume that's just locking a resource. Oop. We got our first YouTube bot. Let's block them. Nice. Oop. Clicked out of the stream. That was Twitch. Yeah, Twitch chat seems to do a better job. I'll have to look into the YouTube chat at some point and try to keep people out who are these bots. There's got to be a better way of doing that. All right. Lock resources. Understand resource locking. This sounds pretty good. Understand resource locking in Azure Blueprints. I wonder, is Azure Blueprints? Azure Blueprints is a specific thing. This might be a little bit more what we want. Lock a subscription resource to prevent other users in your organization from accidentally deleting or modifying critical resources. Okay, so it's locking overrides any permissions the user might have. Simple level, cannot delete or read only. Cannot delete means authorized users can still read and modify a resource, but they can't delete the resource. Okay, so for a specific resource, I'm going to lock it, and I'm going to say they cannot delete. So authorized users who before could delete it, now they can't delete it. They can read it, they can modify it, but they can't delete it. Read only, then means no modification, as well as no deletion. Lock inherits when you apply a lock, inherent scope, all resources within the scope, inherit the same lock. You know, that would just make sense. Understand scope of lock. Before applying locks. Yeah, I think that's just, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's good enough. Functional use of tags. Yeah, I'm pretty sure tags is, you know, tags get used all over the place, like in social media a lot. And just a way of kind of grouping things in a more custom way. Hey, Azure Blueprints, we'll have to figure that one out. Azure Policy, usage of Azure Policy. I don't know what that is, you know, specifically. Overview of Azure Policy, let's get into it. So, Azure Policy helps to enforce organization standards and to assess compliance at scale. Its compliance dashboard provides an aggregated view to evaluate the overall state of the environment with the ability to drill down to the per resource, per policy granularity. Also helps bring your resource to compliance through bulk remediation for existing resources and automatic remediation for new resources. Okay. So this kind of gets back into the idea that you know, there's different regulations that companies have to abide by, and you know, there's a lot of stuff for like Europe and privacy that's come down in the last few years, and Azure wants to make sure that everyone's compliant because you got to do it anyways. If Azure can make it easier, then maybe you'll choose Azure when you wouldn't have otherwise. So, yeah, policy definitions for these common use cases are already available in your Azure environment as built-ins to help you get started. Azure policy data and objects are encrypted at rest. Azure policy evaluates resources in Azure by comparing the properties of resources to business rules. Described in JSON format known as policy definitions. Is assigned to any scope of resource that Azure supports, such as management groups. Okay, so all 4 tiers. The assignment applies to all resources in the resource manager scope of that assignment. Subscopes can be excluded if necessary for more information. Azure policy uses JSON format to form the logic. The evaluation uses to determine whether a resource is compliant or not. Definitions include new data and policy rule. Yeah, I guess I'm not exactly sure without seeing it, like how this would work. Maybe we should watch that video because it's like trying to get a sense of how someone would configure like some sort of policy through code, through JSON configuration. I just don't know really what that means. So maybe 23 minutes. That's not happening. All right. I guess maybe we can at least see. Let's close this out. See what are they talking about here? Giving examples. Here's a portal. Press policy and initial decisions. Azure policy, I think standard tag should be applied. So it's telling, you know, what's not compliant, what is compliant, audit resources missing tag. Okay, audit resource groups missing tag. So I guess there's different tags that it's trying to enforce. Doesn't seem like it would be that helpful though. Let's see, definitions. Name audit SQL DB level audit setting description. Okay, but I want to see the definition, I think. Here we go. If all of field type, okay. So virtual machines, but not, and then whatever, some sort of this virtual machine that's a certain SKU or something, then affect deny. What would that mean to deny? Kind of, to me, almost saying like any virtual machine that's not in this list of allowed SKUs, we don't want that, we're denying that. So I can totally see where that's useful, where like we're trying to make sure no one's creating virtual machines from SKUs that we don't allow, and you know, there's certain SKUs, like you could say, like in terms of like performance or cost or something like that, that like we don't want those, that are way too expensive, or maybe they're way too slow, or but maybe there's also SKUs that are not compliant for different policies or something like that. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It'd be great to see more demos of that, those JSON definitions. That was really helpful. Here we go, policy language. So we've got the ifs of what are we looking for, then what are we going to do? So we're going to deny it, audit it, append, I don't know what that means. Audit if not exist, deploy if not exist. Okay. So some types of things, like we always want to make sure that certain SKUs or resources exist. So we're going to deploy them if they don't exist. We're going to just audit, so it flags you and says, hey, these don't exist. And you can figure out what you're going to do about it. If something does exist that you know shouldn't, you could just deny it, but then you could also just audit and say, hey, this exists when it probably shouldn't. The append, yeah, I don't really know what that would do. Deny. So if it's got the tag cost center, deny it. Policy to deny resource creation if no cost center tag is provided. Oh yeah, so if it doesn't have a cost center tag, then deny it. So that would make a lot of sense. You'll want to always make sure that things are tagged a certain way, then you'd do that. Okay, naming schemes, enforcing naming schemes. It's kind of like a linter when it comes to like programming, like linting, making sure that you're writing your code in a certain way. It's like making sure we're creating our Azure resources in a certain way. This policy enables you to specify a set of virtual machine SKUs that your organization can deploy. So yeah, we kind of went over that scenario before. List of allowed SKUs, policy names. That's the same thing that we did. So that's pretty cool. This YouTube video might be really good to watch. I don't really want to just watch a whole 23-minute video on here, and I might even get like taken down or something for doing that. So I would say check it out if you want. It's the What is Azure Policy blog here. I could throw this in the chat, but I don't have the chat open over there. Just Google that, you'll find it. Cool. We got a great idea what that is now. Azure Blueprints, though, zero idea. So let's figure it out. Cloud Academy. I don't know if we want to go this way. Sure. Azure Blueprints. Blueprints, in traditional sense, are used in architects and engineering to design. Yeah. Ensure that products are both. Yeah, we already know that. Used in the same way as traditional blueprint. Same way engineer, architect use the traditional. Okay. Design and deploy resources in a repeatable fashion. Now you would, I feel like you would use like an ARM template or something like that to do that, but maybe even in writing the ARM template, you want some sort of blueprint for that. By leveraging Azure Blueprints, rebuild and deploy. Allow the IT professional to orchestrate the deployment of resource templates and other Azure artifacts, including role assignments, policy assignments, and resource manager templates. Okay. This is backended by Azure Contents DB. That's interesting, which is globally distributed. Objects are replicated. Multiple Azure regions provide both highly available and latency access objects. Yeah, cool. Yeah, resource manager templates, ARM. Why not just use ARM templates instead of blueprints? Given the fact that Azure blueprints do indeed appear to overlap, yep, understand the difference between. So blueprints is to assist with environment setup. Oh, okay. Such environments often include resource groups, role assignment, policies, and ARM template deployments. Blueprints are essentially packages that pull these types of resources and artifacts together. These packages can then be composed versions and assigned to a subscription. Such blueprint packages can also be audited and tracked. With all of that being said, almost everything we want to do with blueprints can also be done with ARM templates. So what's the difference? ARM templates are documents that don't natively exist in Azure. Such templates are typically stored locally or source control. Once a resource management template has been used to deploy, Azure resources no longer in active connections relationships between the template and the resources deployed from it. Okay, yeah, I suppose that makes sense. So an ARM template, you kind of describe all the different resources that you're creating and yeah, different groups that they're in and all that different types of stuff about them. Hit deploy, it creates the stuff, but then there's no connection after that. It's, you can like destroy everything and then recreate. Whereas it sounds like Blueprints is kind of this continual connection between the resources, these different management levels, and the blueprint itself. Preserving this connection allows for tracking, auditing of deployments. So it's a single blueprint can be used to upgrade multiple subscriptions at once. That's interesting. I've never heard of this blueprint thing, and it sounds like it's pretty useful. So that's cool. I wish people would talk about it more. It'd be kind of cool to see what a blueprint is, so maybe I'll see if this little video here talks about it at all, or shows it. Yeah, I know what Cosmos DB is. Oh, well, this isn't even related. Okay. Great. Let's go back to the Microsoft site and see. There we go. If we've got any sort of. To me, it would make sense why it's different from Azure Policy. Azure Policy is used to like audit stuff, and you could have blueprints. Yeah, you could have a policy in a blueprint to make sure that once resources are created according to the blueprint, that they kind of stay within the policies that you want set up. Blueprint definitions. Different artifacts, resource groups, ARM templates. You can have ARM templates inside of a blueprint. That's an interesting idea. Role assignment. Okay. Yeah, man, at some point I really need to, okay, might check this out here. I need to set up like a whole environment of my own just to like go through all this stuff, because I've never had to do that, and so I've never bumped into like blueprints and Azure Policy and all this different stuff. Also different, that's all included into a blueprint, and then yeah, allows you to scale out, right? So this, yeah, you know, this is really only going to come into play probably for really large companies. I mean, you could have it at small to just make sure that you're setting things up the same way, and that yeah, you can have repeatability, where you could kind of blow everything away and then set it up according to this blueprint, and not have any issues there. It all gets into that idea of treating your stuff like cattle, not like pets, repeatability, and yeah, basically that. So create a blueprint, blank templates, common policy resource groups with. This is our RBAC was our role-based access control, basic networking, VNets. You know, maybe what I should do is, because I want to start up some sort of like podcast, or at least some sort of interview series or something like that, is ask some of the people where I work who do play around with some of this type of stuff, blueprints and Azure policies, and see like, hey, you know, how are we using this, and can you kind of describe it a little bit better, and get more like real world experience. Management groups. That's interesting. I'm starting to drop some frames on the stream here, so I'm gonna decrease that bitrate a little bit. Hopefully that can help that out. Try 6500 and see how that goes. Let's go 6000. Yeah, I think that helped quite a bit. Okay, cool. All right, so blueprint, new blueprint, management groups. So I think it's like this blueprint of different, you know, the different tiers, what's going to be set up. Policy assignment, role assignment, ARM template, resource group. So policy would be that Azure policy that we were talking about. This is adding an artifact to a subscription. So the resource group. And then inside that, yeah, we've got our ARM template to set up the resource or resources. And then I guess maybe they're going to take that from Visual Studio Code, some JSON that they've got. Looks like a VNet setup. Or at least that's part of it. Yeah, we've got a virtual network here, VNet. Bringing in those configurations. You got a whole bunch of different blueprint definitions. Different versions, drafts, whether they're published or not, when they're modified. Locations. That's interesting. Definition, locations, okay. Huh. ARM templates, policy assignment. Apply a default tag and value to all resources. It's a policy. That's pretty cool. Role assignment. Give like maybe a certain group the contributor role. That's neat. Real neat. Lock assignment. This must be the blueprint. Blueprint parameters. Oh, you can lock a blueprint. He's filling in some of the stuff that wasn't filled in before. You can change it, you know, and push out a new version. That's really cool. That's something that'd be great to learn more about. Well, we definitely have a real good idea of what's going on here, you know, in terms of what we need to know for the exam. So that was cool. Describe the cloud adoption framework for Azure. Yeah, I don't know what that is. Here we go. Getting her done. Cloud adoption framework is a collection of documentation, implementation, guidance, best practices, and tools that are proven guidance from Microsoft designed to accelerate your cloud adoption journey. Okay. So I think that pretty much is all you need to know, right? Like it's, you know, hey, here's a whole bunch of different documents to help you adopt the cloud. So if you're mostly on-premise, completely on-premise, here's some resources you can use to figure it out, best practices to abide by, different tools to use. Proven guidance from Microsoft designed to accelerate your cloud adoption. Now, I imagine that's going to take a lot of time to go through all this stuff, but hey, you know, if you've been tasked to do that and you get a whole bunch of whatever weeks or months to to figure all this out and move to the cloud, then here you go. This is a good place to start. So that's cool. Describe privacy and compliance resources. Describe the Microsoft core tenets of security, privacy, and compliance. So yeah, I don't know that offhand. Let's see kind of what they mean by that. Azure approach to trust is based on the following foundational principles: security, privacy, compliance, resiliency, and intellectual property protection. Security development lifecycle, introduce and emphasize security and privacy early and throughout all phases of the development process. So trusted cloud, AZ-900, this is something did that just do? I don't know what they did. Yeah. Cloud. Oof. I don't want to go through all this. Okay. So, security, physical security, infrastructure protection, identity and user access management control, network protection, data protection, shared responsibility. So, you know, yeah, wow, this is a lot to read. Okay, we're just gonna stick with this level. Shared responsibility, I would guess, would mean that, you know, you can't just use Azure and set it up however you want, and then you have some sort of breach, and then you just blame Azure. You got to set things up correctly. Privacy, Azure gives customer ownership and control of their data. When Microsoft deletes your data, where your data is located, who can access your data on what terms. Microsoft responds to government requests for customer data. That would be interesting. Microsoft sets and adheres to stringent privacy standards, and then different privacy tools to give access to requests. Microsoft imposes carefully defined requirements on government law enforcement requests for customer data. Makes sense. Okay. Alright. Compliance, Azure confirms global standards, Azure compliance offerings, tools and guidance. Okay, yeah, high availability is Azure. So we've kind of talked a lot about this type of stuff and seen examples of what Azure does to give you, you know, this different security. You know, obviously this is a document for someone who's got time to read it. That's really walking them through, like, here's everything that Azure is going to do to help you stay secure and keep your data private and keep you in compliance and blah blah blah, to make sure that you trust them with your data, with your resources, all that type of stuff. Okay, so I was talking about that paper. Yeah. That's what that is here. Okay, here we go. This covers multiple services to make up our defense in depth approach security, inclusive services. Alright, so it's just kind of saying what it is. It doesn't really help a whole lot. I think that's probably good enough. Describe the purpose of the Microsoft privacy statement, online service terms, data protection movement. Yeah, to be honest, I don't know what those are. So, Microsoft privacy statement. Privacy is important to us. Privacy statement explains personal data Microsoft possesses. So I think, probably just saying like, hey, this is, the data that we collect, how we use it, how to access, control your data. I don't know, a lot of this seems to be kind of the same thing that we were talking about in the last section with the core tenets of privacy. It's then kind of spelled out in a specific document called Microsoft Privacy Statement. Online services terms, that specifically, so I think these are individual documents here. Online services terms. Licensing. Maybe the name of this kind of changed. It's taken us to licensing terms. Some research on this page. Software. Purchase from Microsoft licensing programs. Oh, here's our DPA Online Services Data Protection Addendum. You subscribe to an online service under the terms of the product terms. Data processing and security terms are defined in Microsoft Online. DPA is an addendum to the product terms, formerly OST, online service terms. Product terms, okay. Current and archive editions of DPA, okay. So it kind of seems like basically, hey, this is what you're agreeing to, these different licenses and stuff that you're agreeing to when you're using Azure products, maybe specific Azure products, stuff like that. Like, it's the fine print type stuff that you don't read, that you just hit yes, yes, yes. But for Azure products that keep them compliant to different policies, also make sure that if you read all of it, what you're getting into, what Azure can do with data and all sorts of different stuff. So, purpose of the Trust Center. Azure. Trust your cloud. Trust it. Product services that run on trust. We're going to achieve more, build our product services with security, privacy, compliance, and transparency in mind. Security, privacy, compliance. That's what we were talking about before. Microsoft Azure. GDPR. That's like a policy that people have to, it's a whole law, isn't it? Azure data subject GDPR, data subject requests. So people trying to do the protection, data protection, trying to keep access to their personal data. Basically, I think what it comes down to. Data location, because obviously that matters. If it is in the European Union, then it's subject to those laws. If it's not, gets into a lot of that stuff that we've been talking about before and kind of keep repeating. Trust Center, Microsoft Trust Center. This is the Trust Center. Okay. So it seems like a collection of different areas. Azure, Azure DevOps, Azure Cognitive Services, and kind of the different documents that spell out what Microsoft is going to comply to and is telling you about these different services, like, yeah, those different policies per service. Is then Microsoft 365, Dynamics, Power Platform, other products. So you can find all that stuff relating to security, privacy, and compliance here in the Microsoft Trust Center. Cool. Describe the purpose of the Azure compliance documentation. I think that's just kind of the same thing, getting into compliance, telling you about different laws and regulation that Azure has to be compliant to, and making sure that it's the document showing you what that is. Describe the purpose of the Azure sovereign regions. Azure and Government Cloud Services and Azure. Yeah. So Azure runs most of their data centers, or Microsoft runs most of their data centers, but not all of them. So in China's got to have their fingers, their claws in it, and they have to run those data centers. But if you want to host your stuff in China, then that's, what you got going on. That's what you got to deal with. And so then there's different standards, that you have to comply with for the China run data centers. I think, at least for a while, I think like Germany had their own. This is different. So maybe it's just China now that's running their own stuff. I think for a while, maybe Germany was running their own data centers for Azure. I think that's what I heard. But so then Azure Government is for, at least the US, it's for government run organizations. So like USDA or FDA or whatever, these different organizations that the government has that maybe want to use Azure resources, but there's like government cloud that they can use, Azure Government Cloud, where it's much, kind of stricter, and there's all these there's a different set of rules and regulations that it's abiding by. And so you would not, just some normal company out there doesn't want to run stuff on Azure Government Cloud Services. And if you don't want your stuff deployed to China, then you don't want to do that either. So, yeah. I wonder, I don't know, maybe Microsoft runs the Azure Government, but maybe the government runs it. I'm not sure how that works. So, describe Azure cost management and service level agreements, also known as SLAs. Okay. Methods for planning and managing costs. Big thing. I once left some Azure resources running that I shouldn't have before. They were pretty low cost, but they were running when they didn't need to. And then we caught that, and it was like, ooh, gotta watch out on that type of stuff. And you could definitely have issues where you're doing some sort of test with some really high cost thing that you planned to only run for whatever, a few hours, few days or something like that, you forget about it, and then you can really build up costs when you didn't mean to. So, gotta watch out. Alright, identify factors that can affect costs, resource types, services, locations, ingress. Okay, so because we're talking about a variety of different resources, we gotta be broad here. So, and then that's where this gets into resource types. Like, you're gonna have obviously different costs from Azure SQL Server to just a VM or something like that. Like, those are two totally different types of resources. They're gonna cost different. And the different services that are in them, like there's certain services within a resource that's gonna cost you more money. If you want backups of your data, that's going to cost more money. If you want application insights turned on for a specific resource, that's going to cost more money. Not everything costs more money. Some things are just little options that you can turn on that are free to turn it on, free to not have it on. But some things definitely do cost money. A big one for a lot of like the PaaS offerings, platform as a service, is is it hosts on Windows, is it hosts on Linux? Linux is usually cheaper, not always, keep that in mind, not always, but it can be usually cheaper. So that's kind of something you'll run into a lot. Locations. Yeah, that's another thing that you really want to look at is where is it hosted. Certain areas of the country or certain parts of the of Earth are gonna be cheaper. Maybe there's a good chance that like some data center in Mexico is cheaper than a data center in Chicago, let's say, or some very highly populated place, and that might. That's going to be due to a number of different things, obviously. Cost to build the data center, there's probably a big part of that comes into like the cost of the electricity, which is, a big thing. So, yeah. And then the traffic, that's a pretty obvious one that if you've got some resource that's getting hammered like crazy, that's could cost more. It depends on the resource, so not necessarily going to cost more, but and it's going to be stated very clearly, and you can look at like pricing calculators. I'll get into that a little bit later. Okay, there's pricing calculators to look at that. Especially something like Cosmos. There's a lot of like Cosmos DB. There's like transactional costs. The blob storage, it's going to cost more if you're storing more documents and larger documents. So those are all things that can affect the cost. Identify factors that can reduce costs. Reserved instances, reserved capacity, hybrid use benefit, and spot pricing. Okay. So let's see, reserved instances versus reserved capacity. Reserved virtual machine instances. Should have probably tells us. Reserve virtual machine in advance, save up to 80%. Exchange or cancel reservations you need. So, I don't have a ton of experience with this. I would imagine there's a lot of different services that we deal with just as normal people where you know, if you reserve something or you kind of pay up front, that type of stuff, then you can get certain discounts because they know that they've got a kind of consistent amount of money coming in, and so that's worth to have that. And they'll give you a discount. So yeah, pay as you go. You know, it really depends. Like, if you, I think I've used this example before, but if you've got some sort of service, like a website that is going to be a part of an ad campaign that's going to, more bots. There we go. Bye bye bots. All right, just looking at the YouTube chat. Sorry. So yeah, ad spot on the Super Bowl. That's going to be this huge spike in usage, and then probably pretty quickly going to go down to almost nothing. So you don't want to reserve a whole bunch of VMs or whatever you're using. You want to do pay as you go, and you'll get this big cost, but it'll be very short time period, and overall the cost won't be that much compared to reserving it. But if you've got something where you're consistently using a certain amount of resources, then maybe you can do some of these reservations, and it probably depends on the different resources that you're using, and be cheaper. Place that I work, we had that going on, using Azure Functions and doing pay-as-you-go at first, but we had like a pretty consistent amount of traffic to where it just was too expensive, and going to kind of a reservation type way of setting up the pricing was cheaper. So I think that would be reserved instances. To me, that says like virtual machine instances or something like that. I'm going to reserve this instance versus capacity. To me, talks more about like I'm going to be using this many CPUs or this amount of RAM or something like that. And maybe you can get discounts because of reserving that capacity versus, you know, because you can ramp up. You can ramp up number of CPUs, you can ramp up RAM, you know, different things you can ramp up. But maybe if you have kind of reserved capacity, then it's going to be cheaper to do that versus kind of ramping up, ramping down, ramping up, ramping down. So hybrid use benefit. So that, I don't know what that's really referring to. Azure hybrid benefit. Stay big on Azure by using your existing on-premise Windows Server and SQL Server licenses in the cloud with no additional cost. Yeah, place I used to work at, that's what we did, and they still do. So I think that's what they do. Anyways, you know, they've got on-premise servers, they've got enterprise licensing for SQL. And they can bring those licenses to the cloud and save money by doing that versus kind of duplicating some of that licensing. So, and you know, probably really it's just a way to get more people to bring their stuff into the cloud, because you know Azure's just kind of losing out by doing this. But if they can bring more people to the cloud, you know, if they're doing it in a hybrid way, so they've got some on-premise stuff and they've got cloud stuff that would be hybrid, then yeah, and, why wouldn't they do that? So spot pricing, not really sure what they mean by that. Spot pricing Azure. spot virtual machines. Access low-cost, unused Azure compute capacity at scale. Scalable compute capacity at deep discounts for your interruptible workloads. Okay. So to me that says like, hey, I've got some compute, some workloads that they need to be done at some point in time, but I don't really care. It's not that important when they're done. So I imagine probably Azure has a certain amount of servers and compute just in general that they have, and maybe they over provision, right? So that they can probably over provision quite a bit, so that, you know, if someone has a Super Bowl, that they can keep up with that. But then when you don't have a Super Bowl, then some of that stuff just sitting there not being used. So if you've got some workloads that can run on that, then you probably get a discount. I think that's really what they're talking about here. Unused compute capacity, right? Yes, cost savings. So like, what would that be? You know, maybe you've got some sort of data set that you want to do some transformations on, and then some analysis on, or something like that. Yeah, big data. You want to do some machine learning, AI modeling, but it's not that big of a deal when it exactly gets done. Batch jobs, rendering, transcoding. So like we were talking about before, if I want to create some closed captions for my videos, I don't really care, you know, exactly when that gets done. I'd like to get it done like sooner than later, but you know, especially if there's not a whole lot of people watching my videos, it kind of doesn't matter. And so then maybe I can get kind of a discount from doing that. Yeah, transcoding videos, graphics, images, so lower cost for doing that. So that's cool. But you know, you couldn't do like a website or something like that. Like, you know, a website needs to you know, when someone asks for an HTML page to be sent to them, then it's got to be sent then. It can't be done like a week later. So there's only certain services that would work with that, I imagine. I suppose if you didn't really care when your website was up and when it was down, then I suppose you could use it. Describe the functionality. Usage of the pricing calculator and total cost of ownership calculator. So pricing calculator, if you go to almost any Azure service, you know, we just do Azure functions and actually spell it correctly. Pricing. Yeah, put a little tag in there. Pricing. You can get a price quote. Let's see. Does this take us to a calculator? No, it's a quote. That's interesting. I don't know. It takes you right to the calculator. Come on, let's go back. Pricing table. Yeah, so usually a calculator is something like this. This is just like a table. It's a calculator. Azure pricing calculator. Sorry guys, I just learned how to type last week. Pricing calculator. Yeah, here we go. So I think you can get to this from individual resources, but you can also just Google it right away. So Cosmos DB, let's say. Here we go. So I can kind of configure different, you know, do I want multiple regions where it's being written to, or just one? That gets into like recoverability type stuff, and yeah, we don't need to go over that again. We already talked about it. Auto scale versus just the standard provision versus serverless. Pay-as-you-go versus reserved capacity. Cool. So this is $24 average per month versus 1 year, and then apparently if it's going to there's kind of a minimum here for your reserve capacity, and it's going to cost you $250 per month. I imagine you're getting a lot more capacity though. And then you can kind of put in, I'm going to have under 1,000 request units per second. And okay, so then you can put in the specifics. I know I'm going to have 50,000, or on average I'm going to have 50,000, right? And then different regions, so North Central US, but then I could kind of look West Central, UK, it's not really changing a whole lot, UAE. Yeah, none of these are really changing. That's interesting. Azure U.S. Government, Arizona. Okay, there we go. Now our costs went up a little bit. It's probably saying, are you sure you want to do that? You probably don't want to do that. Where's China? China. Maybe something that you can get to. At least with Cosmos. You would think. Anyways. So obviously, yeah, you get the idea. And then storage, I know I'm going to do 100 gigabytes, and okay, it's 31 cents per gigabyte per month, so it's going to be $31. Blah blah blah. You get the idea. It's a calculator to figure out what your costs are going to be. I don't think we need to go into that anymore. Total cost of ownership. Azure. Total cost. Define your workloads. Servers, databases. Estimate the cost you realize by migrating your workloads to Azure. So my guess is this is saying, okay, not just for a specific resource, but for, a whole workload that you're doing, because you could have kind of multiple different resources that are put into a given workload. Like you might have a database that's connected up to an API, and there's also blob storage for storing some documents there. And then maybe some Azure functions or something like that. Like maybe all of that to replace that, this is going to be the total cost for that workload. But then also I imagine, there's costs of the VNets behind that, the AD groups, and the Azure firewall stuff, like setting all that stuff. What's going to be the cost of that? And maybe it helps try to let you know everything that's going to be in there, and what that's going to cost. Okay, so like this is saying this is what I've got on premise. I'm calling it workload 1. It's a Windows server. It's got, it's this many physical servers with this much RAM, blah blah blah. And then I can add out different workloads. I can add databases. This is what I've got on-prem. Blah blah blah. Storage. This is what I've got for storage. Oh, this is the amount of bandwidth that it's going through. I have no clue. 500 gigabytes. I don't even know what that means. Adjust assumptions. Different assurances, right? Like if you want, the different amount of nines, right, of uptime. If you want a really high amount of uptime, then it's going to cost you more, and I think that gets into some of those coverages. Oh no, okay. Software assurance coverages and that hybrid benefit. So this is talking about like I've got Windows servers on-prem, I've got licenses for that, so let's use that, like the enterprise license. I've got SQL Server Enterprise, so let's use that. And so you can either check that or don't. Yeah, Geo-Redundant Storage. This okay, yeah, I don't know what a BS series is, but the price per kilowatt on your electricity, right? Because in some, especially for like a small company, you get maybe you only buy like one server. It costs you whatever it costs, and then it's going to work probably for a fair amount of time. And really, the cost of keeping it is just the electricity, and then maybe some person who helps maintain it. But that's kind of mostly the only cost that you've got. And try to see even calculate IT labor costs, storage procurement cost per gigabyte. So I think this is trying to say like, okay, for all of your on-prem stuff, let's try to calculate everything hardware. Okay, this is cool. Everything for setting up an on-prem server setup for whatever you're doing. Let's figure out all those costs, and then probably view this report and compare it to what it would be, what you could do with Azure. And it might say like, this is way cheaper to do with your current on-prem stuff, or maybe you don't have it on-prem yet. You're thinking about, do we do on-prem or do we do Azure? Saying like, hey, yeah, probably on-prem maybe is cheaper for you, or there's probably some bias in the calculator maybe towards Azure, and saying, hey, it's actually going to be cheaper to do stuff with Azure. So that's cool. Describe functionality and usage of Azure cost management. Okay, I played around a little bit with this because I've got some credits from my MSDN account, and so you can view that in the cost management. So it's just kind of this pane where you can see what your resources are costing, and because it's there's a lot of stuff, especially when you get into like the VMs, where it's just a consistent cost that's accumulating over a month. So it's a very linear cost accumulation. You can see this graph and see it doing that. But then if you got something that's more transactional based, oh, more bots in the YouTube chat. Go away, bots. They all have the same comment, so I could probably just filter out that comment text at some point. It's not very creative either. Fun. Yeah, so you can see all your costs in the cost management center. Let's look at it a little bit more. Why not? I haven't played around with it a whole lot, so manage your spending with confidence. Yeah, you can see these different pie charts of what resources are costing certain amounts. Security center. Azure and AWS spending. That's kind of cool. See both in the same place. See, Azure's cheaper than AWS. See, it's really it's a lot of like BI tools really to just look at costs. you know, it's got their like built-in reporting stuff, and you can define your own like filters and like, yeah, columns that you're bringing in and stuff. I think that's mostly what it is. So I think we got a good idea there. All right. Describe Azure Service Level Agreements, aka SLAs, and service lifecycles. So, purpose of an Azure Service Level Agreement. You know, in general, what is an SLA? An SLA is just saying, hey, I'm going to provide, like written, usually, I'm going to provide these services. This is kind of what I agreed to do. And then you either sign off or you don't, right? Describe Microsoft's commitments for uptime connectivity. That's a big part of it. So that uptime gets into, like I was saying, like the level of 9s of uptime. And so if you want more, you have to pay for more, sign those SLAs. And then, you know, it's an agreement, so if they have some sort of outage that is this huge outage like AWS had recently, then they're going to pay you saying we didn't meet our SLAs, you know, during this given time or whatever, and so therefore we owe you a certain amount of money back or something like that. So I think that's a big part of it here. Let's see, yeah, compute virtual machines. What do we got going on? Supply customer availability zones in the same region. We guarantee that your virtual machine can at least 4 nines, so 99.99% of uptime. And let's look into that. That's kind of a fun thing. Level of 9s uptime. Yeah, here we go. This is exactly what I wanted. There's probably a chart about this too. Too slow. So that's Pirates of the Caribbean. She's walking on the plank. Too slow. Alright, so yeah, we got like 2 9s. That means that you're going to have 87.6 hours of downtime per year. So you can calculate it out. So in a month, you're going to have 7 hours of downtime. In a day, you're going to have 14 minutes downtime. Now, that's not like a guarantee or anything like that. These are just averaged. So, you know, there's going to be like these different updates and different, you know, perhaps outages and stuff like that, that if you're only signing up, you know, 99% availability, which isn't much, so it's going to hopefully be real cheap, then you're going to have a certain, you're going to have more downtime. You know, basically it's just like this scale, and it's not like anything's necessarily exact, other than if they don't meet the availability, the SLA for the availability, then they'll owe you money. But it's, you know, it's a general scale of just less availability, cheaper, more availability, more expensive. And then, you know, it goes into like what you have to do, what Microsoft has to do, or what you're signing up for in order to get more availability. But yeah, you can see, you know, 5 9s, and you can 9s and 7 9s, and I don't know if it goes, you know, a ton past that. And that's what people just refer to it as, 5 9s. So you're only getting 5 minutes. With 5 9s, you're only getting 5 minutes of downtime per year. So that's really small. And it just depends on like what are you okay with as a company. can you imagine having 5 minutes of downtime in a year? And you know, there's a lot of companies like, yes, not a big deal. Obviously, it depends on when it is, right? In the middle of the night, maybe that's not a big deal. During the middle of the day, maybe it's a huge deal. Maybe it's not. So, yeah, it's going to depend. You have 2 or more instances deployed across 2 or more availability zones in the same Azure region. But maybe you got multiple Azure regions, different stuff like that. So now you get more 9s because of that. And then the different, premium SSDs, ultra disks will give you more uptime than some of this other stuff. And it's all goes together. You know, you can't have all this sort of geo-redundancy, but then use the cheapest hardware and then expect that, oh, I've got 4 9s for everything. It all kind of multiplies to where, you know, kind of like the weakest chain in the link is, and you kind of have to have everything. If you want everything at 4 9s, you have to have everything at 4 9s. So, what actions that can impact an SLA? Okay, we talked about that. Yeah, availability zones and the quality of the hardware that you're buying, different, premium this and that. Describe the service lifecycle in Azure. Okay, so yeah, there's a lot of stuff, especially, you know, I'm someone who's attending conferences and I'm looking at like bleeding edge stuff all the time. A lot of the stuff that I'm looking at and I'm doing tutorials on, it's all like preview this, preview that. And that's because they're still developing it, and it's kind of in this like, maybe like a beta. You consider it like a beta type stage, where they don't want you, like it specifically said don't use preview SKUs, preview resources for production across the board. And you can do it, but you gotta know what you're getting at. And like some of the SLA type stuff, just like if it's a preview, you don't get like an SLA. Like, who knows what'll happen? You're signing up for a preview. This is what you're getting. Whereas general availability, also known as GA, it's out there. It's, you know, proven itself, and we're definitely gonna hold it to higher standards. You can use it for production and all that type of stuff. So I think, yeah, we started it. So we're like an hour or 40. So this the longest stream so far, for sure. We can cut it off there. There's always more to go into. You know, I was thinking about what we were going to talk about more. Oh, that was up here. Last stream, I think Azure Security Center, which is what, aka Defender for Cloud. You know, I think we should look more into that. And I think maybe I'll try to get us set up to, like, let's set up a specific Azure resource, and then we can look through all the different things that you can provision. I wonder if I could get that from the calculator real quick, actually. Yeah, just Azure pricing calculator for like a VM. There's on a virtual machine. Yeah, if you haven't, definitely check out at least the calculator of like all these different options and what they are. But, you know, there's all sorts of free credits you can get out there. You can get free sandboxes through Microsoft Learn for certain tutorials, where it's just like, kind of just do whatever you want, but you only get like 4 hours. But you can play around with it. So definitely do that, play around with stuff and figure out what you want. Yeah, here we go. Clone. Here are instances. So this is all these different configurations of the amount of cores, RAM, temporary storage. So it's going to differ from like your more permanent storage of like a blob storage. And some of it, yeah, they count in vCPUs or virtual CPUs versus actual cores. It depends what you're purchasing. But they have these different like kind of numbers, and so some of that denotes the quality of like the components in it and what you're kind of paying for. So just like higher quality stuff is going to fail less. Some has to do like capacity. Like this is an insane machine right here, 104 CPU virtual CPUs and 672 gigabytes of RAM. That costs $14 per hour. So you just the thing sitting there is just 14 bucks every single hour. And as to what the E part of it means, yeah, I don't know offhand. I think when you set it up in the portal, it explains it a little bit more. I just don't want to show that and kind of reveal anything about my account right now. So maybe at some point we'll do that. Plus it's getting late here. So I think that's good. Good place to end it. I was gonna say I'm gonna be reviewing this again a little bit more, just I think probably by myself, making sure I've got everything good. You know, it's one thing to kind of look it up real quick and figure it out. It's another thing to really kind of have it memorized. So I need to do that. I need to go through some practice tests that are out there. There are some free ones. I think Microsoft has some free practice tests, or a free practice test. There's some other ones you can at least get like parts of free practice tests. I'd suggest doing that. And then you can buy it, or probably hopefully your company can buy some practice tests for you. And they're not much. Some are like 20 bucks and you get access to them like forever. Some of it's, a certain amount of money and it's already temporary access or whatever. But it might make a lot of sense for your company. Spend like 20 bucks and then you're avoiding, if you fail the exam, that's going to cost more than 20 bucks. So, and then especially if the company can kind of hold on to that practice test and multiple people can take it, that can make a lot of sense. So look into that. I have access to a practice test. Maybe, what I'll do, the ones that Microsoft has, the free ones you can access to, I'll stream that. The other ones that I have access to that cost money, I won't, because, that's just not okay. I'm taking Azure Fundamentals in like 2 weeks, something like that. So, yeah, that'll be good. I'll get there. Anyways, this has been the Coding Canal with your host, Jesse Daher Canal. Thanks for attending, guys. Subscribe, like it, leave a comment, message me if you got questions, all that good stuff. So, thanks, guys, and talk to you later.